Jacob is typically remembered as a deeply devout biblical patriarch, a man of intense faith and integrity. But in the 31st chapter of Genesis, his daily reality looks a lot less like a sacred calling and a lot more like a fiercely toxic employment trap. He works for Laban, his father-in-law and his boss. The core grievance driving a wedge between the two men is incredibly modern: rampant wage theft. Over the course of Jacob's tenure, Laban has deceitfully changed his compensation structure 10 separate times, constantly moving the goalposts to keep Jacob entirely dependent on his estate. To fight back, Jacob relies on a highly specific divine loophole. In a dream, God tells Jacob that the rams breeding with the flock are distinctly speckled and spotted. As a result, Jacob negotiates to keep only the patterned animals as his wages. The biology follows suit, transferring Laban's wealth directly into Jacob's pens. Jacob's wives, Rachel and Leah, who are also Laban's daughters, fully support his frustration. When Jacob calls them into the field to explain the situation, they don't hesitate. They explicitly state that their father treats them like strangers, having sold them off and completely devoured the financial inheritance that was rightfully theirs. When a sacred family hierarchy devolves into an exploitative corporate trap, the standard rules of engagement disappear. The only historically proper etiquette left is to gather your assets and prepare for an immediate, totally unannounced resignation. Executing that resignation means launching a massive logistical operation. Jacob packs up his wives, his children, his camels, and his newly acquired speckled flocks and begins moving them rapidly across the arid plains. He opts for the ancient equivalent of the Irish goodbye. Rather than sit down for a formal exit interview with a toxic employer who has repeatedly lied to him, Jacob chooses to flee completely undetected, slipping away while Laban is occupied elsewhere shearing his sheep. But right before they slip away, Rachel secures a highly unauthorized parting souvenir. Without telling Jacob, she secretly raids her father's tents and steals his sacred household gods, small stylized clay idols called teraphim. These specific idols carry severe legal and cultural weight. In ancient Mesopotamian culture, physically possessing the family teraphim functioned as a legitimate legal claim to the patriarch's wider estate and inheritance. By hiding them in her luggage, Rachel has effectively seized the property deeds to her father's empire. Fleeing into the desert unannounced is risky on its own. Adding grand larceny of the family's most prized legal possessions guarantees that this won't be a clean break. It ensures a catastrophic, high-speed familial confrontation. 3 days pass before Laban even realizes Jacob is gone. Enraged, he gathers his relatives and furiously pursues the fleeing caravan for 7 solid days. He finally overtakes them pitched in the rugged, mountainous terrain of Mount Gilead, a region east of the Jordan River. When Laban finally corners Jacob, he delivers a master class in manipulative parenting. He completely ignores his own decade-long history of wage theft. Instead, he plays the victim, deeply heartbroken that Jacob didn't let him kiss his daughters goodbye or throw a grand farewell party with tambourines and harps. Then, Laban abruptly drops the feigned paternal heartbreak and pivots to his actual furious accusation. "Wherefore hast thou stolen my gods?" Jacob is completely unaware of Rachel's actions before the escape. Believing his camp is innocent, he reacts rashly. He vows right then and there that whoever is found with the stolen idols shall not live. In his attempt to project the authority of a stern, innocent patriarch, Jacob unknowingly puts his favorite wife's life in immediate mortal peril to spite his manipulative boss. Empowered by Jacob's dangerous vow, Laban begins a systematic, tearing search through the entire camp. He moves aggressively from Jacob's tent into Leah's tent, through the tents of the 2 maidservants. Finally, he approaches Rachel's domain. Rachel has prepared a genius hiding spot. She has taken the stolen clay idols, stuffed them deep inside the thick padding of her camel's saddle furniture, and is actively sitting directly on top of them inside her tent. As her furious father enters, Rachel delivers an unassailable excuse. She politely apologizes for not standing up to greet him, claiming that the custom of women is upon me. She is claiming she is menstruating. The extreme cultural taboos surrounding menstruation in the ancient Near East instantly paralyze Laban. Ritual impurity laws dictate that anything she sits on would be considered unclean. He is forced to abandon his search of her saddle entirely. She survives the encounter without a scratch. Weaponizing sheer, unbearable social awkwardness proves to be a highly effective, albeit desperate, strategy for shutting down a hostile family interrogation. Entirely defeated and completely empty-handed, Laban attempts a desperate face-saving maneuver. He haughtily surveys the camp and claims that the daughters, the children, and the cattle are all still technically his property, but he has zero leverage left to enforce that claim. To mask his total loss of control, Laban proposes they initiate a formal, supposedly amicable covenant between the two men right there on the mountain. Jacob agrees, taking a single large stone and setting it up as a pillar. He commands his relatives to gather stones, and together they engage in the heavy physical labor of stacking rough rocks into a tall desert monument. They assign this massive new boundary marker a dual name. Laban names it in Aramaic, Jagur Sahadutha. Jacob names it in Hebrew, Gilead. Both terms mean heap of witness. Building a literal, massive wall of heavy stones in the middle of the desert is the ultimate ancient equivalent of going completely no contact with toxic relatives. Laban also gives the rock pile a secondary name, Mizpah, which means watchtower. Today, Mizpah is used on split-heart friendship necklaces, where two people wear half a coin to symbolize loving longing. That sentimentality comes from a romanticized reading of Genesis 31:49. The Lord watch between me and thee, when we are absent one from another. But reading the actual historical evidence of verse 52 completely destroys that sweet sentiment. Laban says, "I will not pass over this heap to thee, and thou shalt not pass over this heap and pillar unto me, for harm." It is a fiercely passive-aggressive mutual non-aggression pact. The ultimate lesson in biblical etiquette here is deeply pragmatic. Permanently escaping an exploitative father-in-law required Jacob to use a divine loophole, Rachel to use a biological excuse, and both of them to establish a literal, divinely enforced restraining order. The truest foundation of historical family boundaries isn't always built on mutual love and respect. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can build is a giant pile of rocks, followed by the promise to never speak again.